I think if you were to ask 5, 10, 15, or maybe even 20 different college football fans what college football or just the sport of football generally, and by the way, I think we could include coaches in this conversation as well, in this hypothetical, given my experience talking to coaches over the years. If we asked them to explain football in kind of its purest form, or explain what the sport of football boils down to in just a few words or a sentence, you'd probably get a lot of different answers. You might even get 20 different answers among 20 different individuals because, well, I think personally part of what makes the sport of football great is there's a lot of different paradigms, a lot of different lenses, a lot of different philosophies through which you can view the sport. You can see it as a more highly athletic, speed and space kind of sport. You can see it through the lens of, quarterbacks and wide receivers making plays, running backs making cuts and finding holes. You can see the sport through a defensive lens where you're going to throw out, the Charles Woodsons and Mikey Sanderstills out there on the gridiron and expect to get turnovers and make big plays. But I think personally, if you asked a college football purist what the sport boils down to, I think their answer would be something akin to it's a sport of pushing other people around. Because at the end of the day, we can talk about quarterbacks making big plays. We can talk about the Fernando Mendozas. We can talk about the Carson Becks. We can talk about the Bryce Underwoods of the world, even if we're hoping that he kind of, takes a step towards that kind of Fernando Mendoza level this season and next season, right? We can talk about the Jeremiah Smiths. We can talk about we can talk about the Charles Woodsons. We can talk about some of the great players out there that have played the sport at those more athletic, quote unquote, positions. But none of those players make those plays. None of those plays happen. None of those plays develop without an offensive line or without a trench play unit generally. I should say without the offensive or defensive line, given what side of the ball any of those players are playing on. And that's something fundamental to the sport that I don't think, no matter what kind of offense you're running or defense you're running or front you're running or whatever you're trying to do, it's just ingrained, it's innate in the sport. You can't get anywhere or do anything without great trench play. And that's why leading into fall camp this season, Kyle Whittingham and company, and Jim Harding, his new offensive line coach, a highly touted offensive line coach, coming over to the University of Michigan, by the way, I think one of the most important decisions they have to make in fall camp will have to do with this offensive line. And that's why I kind of wanted to do a video highlighting it, to kind of pull back the curtain, if you will, for a second. I actually started out, I was initially going to make like a fall camp battles video where I detailed all the different position groups along in the offense and all the different position groups in the defense. And I may still do something similar to that for each one, but I think you guys are probably here, I'd venture to guess, because you already know who the starters are going to be at various position groups, along the offense and the defense for this team. We don't need to go over Jordan Marshall and Savion Hyder. As much as I'd love to, that's not necessarily an important fall camp battle. I think those two kind of have the two, top depth chart spots kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. We don't necessarily need to talk about Bryce Underwood. He's already been announced as a starter for this team. And in many positions along the defense, Jair Hill will be cornerback number 1. Rod Moore will be coming back, it sounds like, who will most likely start, I would think, for this team. John Henry Daly. There are some position battles over there we'll cover. But again, I think the most important position battle on this team is every position along the offensive line, and specifically the left tackle position. And that's really what I wanted to highlight. What I wanted to talk about, again, in this video is Michigan's offensive line heading into 2026. Because for as much as we talk about Bryce Underwood and how he needs to improve his game, what we need to see from him, we've talked about how the scheme I think, in my personal opinion, kind of favors him with a lot more RPO, a lot more run action, a lot more rolling out of the pocket, and just frankly a lot more running in the way that he likes to run, with some downhill power quarterback running, midline read, arc read, quarterback power, quarterback bash, those kinds of things. But without an effective offensive line, and specifically without an effective, talented left tackle to protect his blind side, because for as much as Michigan's going to run, Underwood, and they're going to run him out of the pocket, and they're going to let him, move the pocket and things like that, even a quarterback like Bryce Underwood needs an effective starting left tackle. I don't think I'm breaking any news there. For as much as the scheme fits Bryce Underwood, and as much as he needs to improve himself, he's not going to improve one iota if the offensive line isn't able to protect him. Good news is, even among the quote-unquote projected starters for this offensive line heading into the season, I think you've got some talent there. And again, I don't think I'm breaking any news to anybody. I don't know if I'm necessarily saying anything novel or new or previously, not understood or not known, because one thing I do appreciate about Michigan fans, and most of you Michigan fans out there watching, is that the bulk of you, most all of you, appreciate offensive line play. I don't know if I'd be able to do a video like this and get that many views or that much attention if I was talking about other teams across the college football landscape, because again, the kind of identities, the philosophies of the coach, things like that, they do matter in college football, and they affect the fan bases. And well, with Michigan football having the kind of blue collar, strong-willed physical identity that they have, and with that being kind of carried on with a coach that very much aligns with those philosophies in Kyle Whittingham, well, I think you all really fully understand how important some of these battles are. So I just wanted to talk kind of briefly tonight about how important some of these decisions are, but really how, in some ways, you might not really be able to mess it up all that bad, because there's talent along this offensive line. It looks like Evan Link, by the way, who did struggle at times over the previous couple of years at left tackle, though if you listen to people like the MGO blog or, knowledgeable people out there, I happen to like the MGO blog myself, they talk about how Link looked like he kind of improved, and I believe the PFF grades reflected that as well as his time moved on at left tackle, but it looks like his time at left tackle might be over, and he might now be moving to guard. But we'll see as fall camp moves on. That means Blake Frazier, the young former four-star, number 19 rated tackle in the 2024 class, will be getting the start at left tackle. He's played here and there, played a few games in his college career so far, and has looked decent so far. Looks to be a promising prospect. But at left tackle specifically, you can't have a conversation about that position without talking about Andrew Babalola, who looked in last year's spring like he was going to at least compete, if not take the starting left tackle position as a true freshman, as a former number 2 overall tackle in the 2025 class, a former 5-star out of the state of Kansas, a big addition to this Michigan Wolverines offensive line room. He could be in the mix as well. So that left tackle position is really interesting, and it could affect the way the rest of the offensive line shapes up. I could see Frazier maybe moving to guard. There's some talk of him moving, though I personally don't know if he's well fit to guard with his body style. He's a little tall for a guard, too, at 6'6", pushing 6'7". Although, if you look back, Zach Zinter was listed at like 6'5" or 6'6", one of the best guards to ever play for Michigan football in its entirety. So that might not be that big of an issue, especially with a tall quarterback like Bryce Underwood standing behind him. But we'll see. We'll have to see how it all plays out. I'm really kind of wanted to list what the quote-unquote projected starters are for now. If you go to any site like OurLads, or you go read articles, anywhere out there across the internet, these are kind of the starting 5 for now: Frazier, Link, Garnera, Nathan Afobe, and Andrew Sprague. And that's a solid starting offensive line room. That's an offensive line room that could potentially get in the mix for the Joe Moore Award. Now, do I think they would win it? No. But if you bring in an Andrew Babalola, who after that ACL injury last year is finally healed up and ready to play, and you can move Blake Frazier around to somewhere where he's also super effective. If you shuffle him between Link and Afobe and you figure out that guard position. By the way, Brady Norton is a graduate transfer who's still here, played for Cal Poly, was only a 3-star coming out of high school, but has been a decent, effective offensive lineman in his time so far, at Michigan. He could get in the mix as well. So you've got 7 guys, for 5 positions, and 4 of them are former 4 or 5-star recruits. And let's admit, if you're a guy like Jake Garnera and you came out of high school as an interior offensive lineman recruit and you were a 3-star, that's a pretty high rating, by the way, coming out of high school for an interior offensive lineman. It's really rare for an interior offensive lineman to be rated like a 4 or even 5-star coming out of high school. That has to do with the nature of recruiting rankings. Sometimes people forget a recruiting ranking has a lot more to do with where the scouts think you'll eventually be drafted, and they do take into account there just aren't that many centers and guards that get drafted, night 1 of the NFL draft. It's just not a position that's as valued as some other positions, especially tackle. That's changing, I should say. Some people may say something in the comments about that because there have been some guards that have gone as like higher picks in recent years, but generally that's how it works. Nathan Afobe, Evan Link, and Jake Garnera as your interior offensive line, all being former 3-stars who projected high coming out of high school, according to the scouts, and all guys who have played decently well so far in the college ranks, is not a bad interior offensive line. And then you add Frazier and Sprague, who were highly rated. Well, Andrew Sprague was a number 6 overall tackle in the 2024 class, a former 4-star, borderline 5-star himself, has played really well. So far in his time at Michigan when he has been on the field. That's a solid starting line. And then again, you add in the possibility of Babalola and Brady Norton, and it makes it all that more intriguing. And well, I haven't even gotten into the other guys in this room, by the way. You do have other guys that I don't think will see much playing time. I don't think they have much of a chance of cracking that starting lineup. But it is worth mentioning they do have guys like Luke Hamilton, who was a decently highly rated prospect out of high school back in the 2023 class. Actually committed the day that Michigan upset Ohio State. Actually, it was a 2024 class now that I think about it, I believe. I'd have to go back and check. But either way, he was a 3-star, borderline 4-star, depending on what site you looked at. Malachi Lee is a transfer freshman. One of those guys came over, I believe, after being recruited by Utah, but I might be wrong. He could play tackle. He could play guard. Currently, he's listed at tackle on the depth chart. And then you have Houston Kahaina, I hope I pronounced that right, Torres, who transferred over, could play center or guard, and will most likely back up Garnera, but there might also be kind of a position battle there. And then Avery Gatch, who was an in-state commit, former 4-star recruit from just a couple classes ago. Many people may be familiar with him. So that's really the entirety of the offensive line room right there. But again, you've got 7 guys for 5 positions, and I don't think that's a bad spot to be in at all. And this really is, well, the reason why I wanted to do this video as kind of the first video talking about fall camp positions is, again, because of how important and how deeply that decision will impact the rest of the team. Bryce Underwood needs all the support he can get if he's going to thrive in this new offensive system. Jordan Marshall and Savion Hyder, for as great of running backs as they are, you don't maximize their potential without a road-grading offensive line, punching holes and creating gaps that they can run through. We all know, as Michigan fans, I don't think I'm breaking any news here, the offensive line is where it all starts. And in a Jason Beck-led college offense, that's definitely true as well. So we'll keep an eye on these battles as fall camp goes on. I'll try to keep my ear to the ground and see what's being said out there. I am not an insider by any means, but I do happen to know some people that are, so I may have some info for you guys kind of from the insides. I don't want to paint myself as an insider now that I think about it, but I do have, I guess you could say, connections. So we'll see as fall camp goes on. I'll let you guys know what I am allowed to tell you, and we'll go from there. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for supporting the channel, by the way. We're nearing 400 subscribers, which is crazy to say because I think this is only like our 15th video since starting this venture. So really appreciate you guys. Feel free to subscribe, like the video, comment on how you feel about Michigan's offensive line coming into this next season. And until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there.